Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope you're all doing well today. Today I've got an amazing assortment of military meets cryptid encounters. Before we get into these encounters, though, a couple links I'd like to share. The first link I'd like to share with you is Tromix Lead Delivery System, home of the original 458 SOCOM and owned by Tony Ramore, a true American. He designed an AR upper to be attached to your existing AR lower and blast 458 instead of 223 or 556. He designed this for our troops in the Middle East to stop truck bombs. Straight across the board, guys, if 458 is going to stop a truck, it's going to stop the dog man. Tromix link is in the description below, and please check some of Tony's other amazing products out. On to my links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch to help this channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below, as well as my second channel for creepypasta, fanfiction, and scary voice acting. Stories that don't belong on this channel. I also started a GoFundMe page to help raise money for Urbex, cryptid hunting, and ghost hunting videos. I have an SLS cam, an EVP recorder, and some trail cams, and I'm going to be getting out there this weekend to do some ghost hunting and hopefully have that video up in the middle of next week for you guys. Now, enough chit-chat. Let's get on with these military encounters, shall we? For today's first encounter will bring us to the World War II era. My grandfather served in World War II and he was on a Navy destroyer. He served with a gentleman and they were heading to Japan. Turns out they got to tour Japan before the invasion, so that's a good thing for them. They moved back to Tennessee, and my grandfather's friend, he had bought a house out on a farm in Jonesboro, about 20 minutes south of my grandfather. They noticed something really weird going on at the house at first, but they didn't really think much of it. They would hear knocking at the door at night and that kind of stuff. Well, one night, him and his wife were sleeping, and he hears this blood-curdling shriek from outside in the back forest. There's a wooded area back there behind the farmhouse. It sounded like a woman being murdered. So this guy, being afraid of nothing, he was about to face death fighting the Japanese, takes out his shotgun and goes in the backyard and looks around. He sees a pair of yellowish eyes staring at him. This isn't a pole sticking out of the ground that's 3 or 4 feet off the ground. This is about 6.5 feet and yellow. That's all he could see. He took one look at it and said point blank he shot it between the eyes, and it didn't flinch. It just looked at him. He couldn't make out a shape. All he could see was its eyes, and he said they were almost cat-like. Today's second encounter, and we'll stay in the World War II era. One of the most bizarre creatures sighted during the war in the Pacific also occurred in the southern islands, this time specifically on Okinawa Island. In this case, troops reported seeing strange humanoid beings in the sky, often near military installations. These flying humanoids were mostly sighted around the time of the bloody Battle of Okinawa in 1945. These beings were described as having large, leathery wings like a bat, yet seemingly to be mostly human in other respects. The flying humanoids were mostly solitary, although there was at least one occasion when more than one was spotted together. Whatever the creatures were, they were mostly reported as being silent and shy, keeping their distance and never really coming close enough to see a lot of detail. Despite this, it was often reported that the eyewitnesses had an unnerving feeling that they were somehow being observed by an enigmatic creature. The sighting of these flying humanoids have an eerie similarity to more modern-day sightings from a military installation in Japan. In 1952, at Camp Okobo, near Kaito, Japan, a private Sinclair Taylor reported seeing something strange in the sky. The being was about 7 feet tall with a similar wingspan. The panicked guard began firing his weapon towards it, but when he looked at the spot where the being had been hovering, it had vanished. Taylor had originally thought the creature was a giant bird at first. It was not until it drew closer that he realized it had a humanoid body. The creature had been flapping its large wings. The sound of this flapping was what first alerted Taylor to the creature's presence. But upon coming closer, the thing began to hover instead. The being was described as around 7 feet tall with a similar wingspan. Depending on the report you read, there is also mention of glowing eyes. However, it is difficult to say if this was when Taylor originally reported it or it's an embellishment later added. The creature hovered before the terrified Taylor, who began firing his weapon at a frenzied panic. When he looked back to where the creature had been, it was gone, leaving behind no apparent blood or any other physical evidence. Taylor, also not the only eyewitness to whatever this thing was. When he reported it to his sergeant, it was revealed that the guard had seen what was apparently the same thing a year before. Although Taylor didn't know of any other sighting and had no contact with the other eyewitness, the descriptions of the creature were remarkably similar. It is unclear whether this sighting has anything to do with the World War II sightings in Okinawa, but they seem similar enough to warrant mention. It is unfortunate that we may never have answers to these fascinating wartime cryptid accounts. At the time, there was rarely any attempt to collect evidence or launch a proper investigation into these bizarre occurrences. In most cases, such reports were considered merely anomalies or distractions from wartime duties. In addition, few scientists would have been willing to go back and venture into these war zones to investigate such reports, even if they were so inclined. As such, World War II cryptid accounts such as these may forever be lost in time. Today's third encounter. My name is Redacted. In May of 1973, I was a Marine. We did a battalion-size exercise in the area of California known as Casey Springs. We were told that there were no roads to get there, and we were inserted by helicopter. I was sent out on a midnight ambush with 15 other Marines. It was a computerized war game. It worked on the computer, and so they send Marines out to see if it could be feasibly done. What we did was we were going after an aggressive force. We set up a linear-shaped ambush shaped like an L. And when your victims walk into it, it's a computerized kill. Well, we set up this ambush at midnight, and we had 2 individuals walk into our ambush, and we opened fire with blanks. And as it turns out, we thought they were bears. So we scramble, shooting our blanks at these individuals, and they separate. One went one way, the other went the other. We got back to our PPB, which is platoon-sized patrol base, and we told our lieutenant what had happened. He radioed it in to our commander. This was the first night of a 4-day war game, and it was canceled. We were given orders to light a large fire, get a fixed bayonet, and stand on a 360 around our blazing fire. All through the night, we heard high-pitched, the only way I can describe it was that of a death call of a bear, and in the morning we had 2 helicopters come with a base game wardens and some other fellas. To this day, I don't know who they were. We were made to bring them back to the area where this had happened. 2 of the individuals walked where we directed them, and we were ordered to leave the area. And this is something the Marine Corps does not do, to cancel a computerized war game. There were over 3,000 Marines involved in this, the logistics and money that was spent on this, and it was canceled. Today's fourth and final encounter comes to us from a man who served a distinguished military career, and his reputation is quite admirable from what I've seen. In 1970, I was serving as a corporal in the U.S. Army, deployed to South Vietnam in a region about 30 miles south of the DMZ. At the time, I was second in command of a squad of soldiers. We had set up a bivouac in a jungle area that had a few steep hills. That evening, my section was ordered to patrol one of the small valleys west of the encampment. We moved out led by our sergeant. Not long after entering one of the small valleys, we detected movement ahead of us. It seemed to be scattered activity, so we doubted it was the Viet Cong, but we weren't positive. We hunkered down about 15 minutes, getting occasional glimpses of something moving within the trees and brush. There wasn't enough light to detect what we were observing, even though the moonlight was bright at night. After a while, the activity halted, so we continued to move slowly through the valley. As we approached a sheer wall on the hill, it looked like someone or something had stacked large stones and boulders and paths in front of us. There was also an opening in the hillside that looked like a cave entrance, approximately 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, narrowing at the top. When observing the passageway, it appeared to have been cut away by machinery. The edges were smooth, with small, even-spaced grooves. We were puzzled by this because we had never seen enemy caves like this, just underground tunnels. The sergeant suggested that it may be a Viet Cong support depot. So we started to assess how we were going to investigate the cave. About this time, things got strange. We began to notice a putrid odor emanating from the cave entrance. The only thing I can compare it to was rotten eggs and human decay. It was so revolting that a few of the soldiers were becoming ill and started to back away into the jungle, including the sergeant. I was directing a light into the entrance of the cave to observe anything, but there was a haze that was impossible to see through. We had no idea what was before us. The entire squad took a position in heavy brush, approximately 150 feet from the entrance, far enough not to be detected, but close enough to observe the entrance. We remained quiet for what seemed like forever. The jungle was strangely calm, though we heard rumbling sounds coming from a distance. It was very eerie. The sergeant was sitting near me, talking to himself. It was obvious he was frightened. I was looking at the rest of the squad. Each had wide eyes and was scanning the area. No one was going to doze off during this patrol. After several hours, dawn was approaching and it started to lighten up. I checked my watch. It was just before 0500 hours. Just then we noticed movement in front of the cave. A being I first thought was a man moved through the entrance into a clearing in front of the cave. As it stood up from a crouch, it stood at least 7 feet tall, and started to look in our direction. At that time, another similar-looking creature was moving out of the cave. They were making hellish hissing sounds and looking directly at us. The only way I can describe these beings is that they looked like an upright lizard. The scaly, shiny skin was very dark, almost black. Snake-like faces with forward-set eyes, and they were very large. They had arms and legs like a human, but with scaly skin. I didn't notice a tail, though they wore long, one-piece dark green robes, along with a dark cap-like covering thing on their head. I never noticed if they had anything in their feet. No one gave an order. It seemed like the entire squad opened fire at once. Every piece of vegetation between us and them quickly sheared away. I yelled out, "Cease fire!" At the same time I was looking in the direction of the cave. There was nothing there. We immediately checked our flank in case these things circled around us, but there was nothing. As we approached the cave, ready to resume action if needed, it became apparent that the beings had escaped, most likely back into the cave. It was soon decided to set charges and close the cave entrance. We returned to camp and we all seemed to be in a daze. There was little discussion of the incident and we were never debriefed, so I know the sergeant never filed a report. Then again, if he did, it was kept quiet by the brass. What an amazing story to end this upload with. Growing up in a time when the Vietnam War was still fresh, and my dad being a vet, there was movies like Missing in Action, Rambo, all of those movies that were, kind of stationed around the Vietnam War. And I always was intrigued by the jungles, and then growing up watching cryptid movies like Chud, and then other monster movies, always made me wonder if there was crazy stuff out there. Always being afraid of the woods, behind my house, and looking at how dense these jungles were. This was just an amazing, amazing story. Just wow, And then the third encounter, 1973, U.S. soil. 3,000 Marines on a 4-day excursion. That's not cheap. And to cancel it, the guy's right. To cancel it, that just doesn't happen. Especially Marines, They're just fearless. So, what the hell was that? What two things out there? Who knows? And then World War II. God, my grandfather was a World War II vet. You hear about all of these crazy things, and these flying humanoids and this and that. Who's to say that some of these things were trying to stop the war? Or, there's just so many. It's crazy. It's just crazy. It goes back and forth in my head. Were these things good? Were they bad? What were they doing? Yada, yada. Anyway, I hope you guys liked this upload. And, wow. I loved it. I really did love it. Anyway, have a great day, guys, and I bid you farewell.